Hey guys, welcome back for lesson number 2. So in the first lesson that we did, I chose to do primary and secondary sources when you're researching and knowing between the two of them which one is which, why they're important, and how to go about finding them in the historical databases. So for this lesson, we're going to kind of piggyback off of the primary and secondary, but rather than focusing on finding your sources, we're going to focus on picking your subject that you're going to be researching for either an essay or a project or whatever kind of thing you're doing for a historical class or a history class. So the 3-step process that you're going to go by is picking a subject, narrowing your lens of the subject to a specific topic within the broad, and then you're going to check databases, find the information, and cite your sources. So I have here a few examples of broad view subjects that you could use. So we have the United States Civil War, the California Gold Rush, Prohibition, which is what I did in the first lesson, and that worked out well. There's a lot of little things you can focus on within the broad subject of Prohibition. The attack on Pearl Harbor, World War II. I mean, I know those are kind of two different things, but there's a lot of stuff that you can look at for Pearl Harbor, so I figured that would work as a broad as well. When you're picking a focus, this is, I mean, it's like a snowman almost. The bottom, the biggest, is going to be your broad subject. From there, you pick a more focused subject. So let's say in my example, I'm doing World War II as a giant topic. Within World War II, I just show a few examples here. You could do like, what did World War II look like for women? Just women, not the men, not the whoever was fighting, not the people, the politicians that are organizing it, just for the women. What did it look like for Native Americans? What did it look like for LGBT? What did it look like on the home front? Not even a part of the war. And so I chose to do women within World War II. So I have Rosie the Riveter, who is like a giant icon, and I actually don't quite know if she really had much to do with the like the war front, but on the home front, I don't know if you've taken history classes where you've studied home front of World War II, but Rosie the Riveter was a huge deal. She symbolized the hard-working willpower of women to just keep going while all the men were out, and many women were out too. I'm going to get to that actually. There was a surprisingly higher amount of women in World War II than I even knew. And I've taken a lot of classes on World War II, but when I was doing research, I was mind blown by how many women there were and how big of roles women played in that war too. So the first source that I found, and this is just an example, I'm giving you an example of how to go about doing the research for it. I found a book that was written by an author named William Gray on May 7th, 1945. So this was from the Philippines. He was on the front, on the Pacific front, fighting the Japanese in the Philippines. And I put a couple of notes that I found. Basically, they were fighting for the Baguio Mountain, and they were using like bulldozers and trucks and stuff to get through this really dense terrain. And so these Philippine women, known as the Igorots, came down from the mountains to help out, and they brought food, medicine, and clothes. The U.S. military, once they realized that these women were helping out, started paying them in pesos. That was their currency, I guess, there. And it was, some of them were pregnant, some of them were in their 60s, and they would carry food and stuff through through jungles for these U.S. soldiers. And I couldn't believe that, the amount of effort that they were going through to make that happen. So anyways, I chose that as a primary source. It's a really cool like little book that I found on the EBSCO database, which is a really good database, honestly. I mentioned that in the first lesson for finding historical subjects. The secondary one that I found was just women that joined the Marines and were both fighting on the ground with the men, and then also women that joined the Marines and were pilots and were fighting in the air. So that was pretty amazing. So these are examples of just showing, again, doing my sources. This isn't the point of this lesson. That was the first lesson, but I'm just showing, following through. You got to do that. So yeah, now I'm going to have you guys go through, pick a broad historical subject, something massive, not your narrowed yet, just the big overall subject. Then, after you find that, let's say you do the Civil War. Pick 3 different lenses. Say you do, what was the involvement of women in the Civil War? What was the involvement of African Americans in the Civil War? What was the involvement of Native Americans? And look at different demographics, find out who was involved. It's really interesting when you do that, because a lot of times I feel like what happens in history is you're like, okay, Civil War, who am I looking at? Ulysses S. Grant, Robert E. Lee, Abe Lincoln. Like the 3, like the main people that everybody's already been taught about. I think that's a really cool thing about history right now, is that as awareness for minorities and for women and for all kinds of different demographics other than just the white men who are running the show, as awareness for all of these other people are being spread, the way that research is done for historical topics and historical projects across the board is drastically changing. And it's really cool. It's pretty awesome to see it. So I want you to find 3 different lenses. I want you to do a primary and a secondary source for whichever lens you're going to choose as your topic. And then I want you guys to cite your sources. Thank you, and I hope this helped.